All right, in this explainer, we're going to look at Donald Trump through a really unique lens, not as a typical politician, but as a modern anti-hero. We're going to explore the argument that his biggest flaws are also the very source of his greatest effectiveness, that you simply can't have one without the other. So let's break it down. So here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll define what a tragic hero even is. Then we'll see how his outsider status is framed as a kind of strength. After that, we'll look at a couple of examples of some really decisive actions, explore this builder's mindset that supposedly shaped him, and then finish up with the tough moral question all of this leads to. Okay, so first things first, let's unpack the foundation of this whole analysis, this idea of Trump as a modern tragic hero. What does that actually mean? Right, so this source gives us a really specific definition here. A tragic hero isn't just someone with a flaw. It's someone whose flaw is the engine for their greatest actions. The two are completely inseparable. You can't have one without the other. And here's the central paradox this analysis presents. The very traits that draw so much criticism, not being polite or humane, are argued to be the same exact traits that make him an effective leader. The idea is, if you take away the flaw, you just don't get the action. So, how does this tragic hero idea actually play out? Well, it's tied directly to his status as an outsider, someone who is, as the source puts it, totally liberated from the usual rules of the game. The source draws a really direct line here. Because he's indifferent to what the establishment thinks, he's free to act in ways that traditional politicians like a Bush, a Romney, or McCain just wouldn't. He isn't afraid of being a pariah. Now, this is a fascinating point from the source. It argues his supposed lack of awareness of who the influential people are isn't a weakness, but actually a strength. I mean, think about it. You can't be swayed by people you don't even know you're supposed to care about. And this extends to major institutions. According to this analysis, by labeling big media outlets like the New York Times, NPR, and PBS as fake news, he effectively neutralizes their influence over his decisions. Okay, so that's the theory, but how does it actually apply in the real world? The source points to two key examples where this liberated outsider status allegedly led to decisive action when others had completely stalled. The first case study they present focuses on illegal immigration, an issue that the source claims had been met with nothing but inaction for years. The source uses this really stark number, 500,000, to frame the scale of the issue. The argument is that while past presidents talked about the problem, Trump's whole persona is what allowed him to take direct and pretty uncompromising action. The second key example cited is a major shift in foreign policy, and it's all about Iran. So according to the source, for decades there was this consensus. Iran was a threat, but confronting it directly was just way too risky. Trump is then portrayed as the one person who broke that consensus simply by asking, why not? And the result, in the source's own really powerful words, was the destruction of the idea that Iran was militarily invincible. So the action is framed not just as a policy change, but as shattering a myth that had been held for a very long time. So where does an approach like this even come from? Well, the source traces it all back to an origin story from his early career. The analysis argues that to really understand President Trump, you have to see him as a New York builder. His entire style is framed as a product of that world, this relentless drive to get things done and build them fast. The argument goes that building in New York City meant navigating this crazy landscape of unions, politicians, and activists. And according to the source, this experience honed a very particular, and let's be honest, a very tough set of skills. And to make this point a little more concrete, the source shares this anecdote from someone who used to watch him from a high-rise nearby. So the story goes that Trump would pull up in his limo, get out in his expensive suit and wingtips, and walk right onto the muddy construction site to talk with the workers. The key detail, though, is that this wasn't some one-time photo op, it was a regular thing. And the conclusion the source draws from all this? That his time in the building trades gave him a genuine empathy for working people, an authenticity it claims many career politicians lack, which allowed him to connect with voters on a completely different level. Okay, so let's bring this all together. We have the tragic hero, the liberated outsider, and the builder. And it all culminates in this central moral question that the sources basically leaves for us to decide. This visual really spells out the core trade-off being presented. The effective action, that big slice, is directly linked to the parts seen as not polite or not humane. According to this framework, you can't get that big piece of the pie without accepting the smaller slices that come with it. So the ultimate choice isn't framed as good versus evil. Instead, it's presented as a choice between flawed action on one hand and the passive inaction of so-called good people on the other. And that leads us to the final, really provocative question posed by the source, which uses an analogy from classic Westerns. Where does the true morality lie? With the passive townspeople, or with the flawed hero who comes in and gets the job done? That's the question this analysis ultimately leaves us with.